Alright guys, now we're going to take a look at some of the effects of the end of Reconstruction on African Americans in the South. One of the biggest things that changed was the voting restrictions. You had three basic ways that voting was restricted for African Americans. The first of these was a poll tax, which required people to pay a tax before they could even cast their votes. And you had to go down to the polling place and pay your taxes, and then you'd receive a receipt like what you're seeing right here to verify that you had done that, and then you could cast your vote. Another way they did this was through a literacy test, giving you a very complex test to determine whether you could read or write within a short space of time. But you could get out of the literacy test if you were able to prove that your grandfather could have voted. This was what was called a grandfather clause. Unfortunately, the only people whose grandfathers could have voted were whites, and it was a way to restrict African Americans from voting. You also had the creation of the so-called Jim Crow laws, designed to create segregation and a separation between the races, separating them in all public places, whether it was drinking fountains, restrooms, waiting areas, even hospitals to a degree. And this was again designed to make them feel inferior, to push them away from white society. And this was challenged by Homer Plessy in a case called Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896, in which he sat in a white section on a railroad car and was ejected from that. The Supreme Court ruled that separation of the races was legal and did not violate the 14th Amendment requirement of equal protection so long as the two facilities were equal. And that remained the law of the land until 1954 in the case of Brown versus the Topeka Board of Education. You also had lynching, which had increased significantly in the 1880s and 1890s, where an angry mob would go and hang a person, often without the person committing a crime. In fact, in the South, when this occurred, more often than not, the only crime the person had committed was that they were African American, which was deemed to be a crime, or they had committed some violation of the Jim Crow etiquette, which we'll talk about a little bit later. It's a terrible, terrible thing that had gone on, and the fact that people were not even being arrested for it. You had the Freedmen's Bank, which was attempting to help African Americans buy land, but most of them couldn't even have enough money to get a loan or a collateral to get a loan. And many of them ended up becoming sharecroppers, which required them to rent land from a landowner who would receive a percentage of their crops as payment. The thing is that this just created a cycle of debt because the African Americans had to borrow money for their feed and their supplies and their seeds, and eventually they were just in debt and couldn't ever leave, and this was simply slavery by another name. Thanks guys for paying attention. Hopefully we took good notes, and we'll see you tomorrow.